Hello, planet Earth, and thanks for listening once more to Master English with Tim, the podcast where Tim helps you to learn English in depth and detail. I'm Tim, world traveler, polyglot, native speaker English teacher for 18 years, and author of several resources for learning English, including this podcast. I want to start this week's episode by telling you about the English expression, fake it till you make it. Let's break this expression into pieces to understand it. When you fake something, you try to make people believe that something is true, which is not true. For example, if you have really a lot of problems in your life, you might fake your own death. If you don't want to go to work, you can fake being sick. If you have no sense of ethics or right and wrong, you could fake being a doctor. Even worse, you could fake being a pilot, although you probably wouldn't live for long if you actually flew a plane. Now, let's look at the second part of this expression. When you make it, it means that you successfully arrive at your destination, often after a situation where success was not guaranteed. For example, we made it to the train station just in time to get on our train. Another example, after 2 weeks of walking every day, we finally made it to Everest Base Camp. So what does it mean if you fake it till you make it? Well, this humorous expression means that you start doing a job that you don't have the skills that are necessary for it. You fake knowing how to do the job, and while you're doing that, you learn those necessary skills by seeing how the other people at work do the job and what they expect you to do. Some jobs where you might be able to fake it till you make it are PR specialist, psychologist, and store manager. So, can you fake it until you make it in English? Well, in order to see if we can fake it till we make it in English, we first need to know what it means to make it, what it means to arrive successfully at our destination of mastering English. So, by master English, I mean that you are able to express your thoughts, experiences, and emotions on a wide range of topics. If you've mastered English, you're able to do this in detail, with fluency, with complexity, and with accuracy. Let's look at each of those. A detail is something that is so small that you can see or notice it only if you pay special attention to it. If you can express yourself in detail, that means that you have the vocabulary to express more than just general ideas. Now let's talk fluency. If you express yourself with fluency, that means that you speak without stopping to search for words and at a speed that sounds natural for others. If your speech has complexity, that means that instead of using just a few grammatical constructions, you use a range or variety of them. And finally, if your speech has accuracy, that means that it contains relatively few mistakes in pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar. So, what would you need to know to be able to do all of these things? What would you need to know to really master English? Well, over the 19 years that I've been teaching English, I have had a few students who already had mastered English with detail, fluency, complexity, and accuracy in their spoken language when they started taking classes with me. And with 2 of those students, I actually had a chance to measure their vocabulary sizes by starting to count how many words they knew. That's right, I counted the words. Well, I did this by giving these 2 students a list of 20,000 words, which is on the low end of what an educated adult native speaker knows, and by then asking them to cross out the words they were sure they understood and to color in yellow the ones that they either hadn't seen before or they had seen but felt uncertain about. For example, because they weren't sure about a word's meaning or the right way to use it in a sentence. These 20,000 words were organized by frequency. That means that the most commonly used words were at the beginning of the list. Also, the words were organized into bands or groups of 1,000, the first 1,000, the second 1,000, and so on. In the first 1,000, both students colored a couple of words. The same was true for the second 1,000, from 1,001 to 2,000. And not too surprisingly, as the two of them got deeper into the list of 20,000 words, they started to color or highlight more and more words in each band of 1,000. One of them started to highlight maybe one in every 10 words in the band from 5,001 to 6,000, and the other did that in the band from 6,001 to 7,000. And we actually stopped there because they both could already express themselves well, and because I wanted them to focus on unknown words that were more common and earlier in the list. Based on what I saw with these two students, I would guess that around the 9,000 or 10,000 word mark, they would start to know less than half of the words in each band or block of 1,000. Also, looking at some of the words from the 9,000 or 10,000 word mark, I can say that they are not the kind of words that you need to use very often. And from looking at the words in the list myself, I can say that in my personal opinion, if you solidly know 5,000 or especially 6,000 of them, you can say that you have some mastery of English. So, in conclusion, if you really know the first 5,000 words of English well, then you have made it or arrived at your destination of mastering English. I do want to note here though that we always need to be careful when we use metaphors to talk about language learning. Arriving at a destination is a yes-no thing. You have arrived or you have not arrived, in the same way that a person is dead or alive, pregnant or not pregnant, or a citizen of a country or not. Mastery of a language, on the other hand, is more like being rich or happy or informed. You can master a language so that you can talk in detail with fluency, complexity, and accuracy, and then you can keep going and then keep learning so you have more of all four of those things. Okay, now that we have talked about what it means to make it in English, how can you fake it? How can you make others think that you know English really well, even if that is not exactly true? Well, the key is to really fully master the basics. Let's start with some low-hanging fruit. That is things that are very easy to learn, but have a big impact on the way you sound. The first thing to do is to stop using the word very. Native speakers of English just don't use the word very all that often in conversational language. Instead, we usually say really, like in the sentence, "That was a really good movie," or "I'm really excited about my new job." Another thing that native speakers almost never say is "the USA." People really honestly never say that. Instead, people say the United States or the US. Now, let's talk about some really easy ways to change your pronunciation to sound more natural and native. First, don't say you, say ya. Here are 3 examples. 1. Are you hungry? 2. If you need any help, just call me. 3rd and last, do you know when the meeting starts? So, another word which native speakers pronounce differently is he. Native speakers very often just don't say the first letter, so they say e instead of he. 3 examples. 1. Does he have a car? 2. He needs to wake up early tomorrow. 3rd and last, he knows a lot of really interesting people. Another word that has a surprising real-world pronunciation is the modal verb can. In reality, people pronounce it as kin or kin. 3 examples. 1. Yes, I can speak English. 2. We can meet you at the train station. 3rd and last, can you work on Saturday? There is an important detail here, which is that we keep the classic classroom pronunciation of can when we use it with not. One example, please speak slower, I can't understand you. Okay, there's one more word that has a very reduced pronunciation. That word is to, like need to do something or like to do something. Its real-world pronunciation is tuh. 3 quick examples. 1. Let's go to the park. 2. I'm going to the store. 3rd and last, she went to Paris last summer. So, to uses that tuh pronunciation, especially when it's part of common verbs like going to, want to, have to, and need to. Here are the real-world pronunciations of each of those verbs, each one with an example. 1. Going to becomes gonna. Example sentence, you're gonna be late if you don't hurry. 2. Want to becomes wanna. Example sentence, do you want to order a pizza? 3. Have to becomes have to. Example sentence, we have to save more money. 4th and last, need to becomes need to. We need to buy gasoline soon. So, that is all that I have time to say about real-world pronunciations here, but actually it's a really big topic that affects not just a few words and phrases like gonna or wanna, but really, honestly, the whole language. If you want to learn more about these kinds of pronunciations, you can listen to episode 7, which is called The Chewing Gum Accent, and episode 18, which is called More Chewing Gum, Please. Okay, so let's move on to what vocabulary we need to use more or better if we want to fake mastery of English. Actually, this here is where we move from relatively simple and easy hacks to something more like actual language learning work of the kind that you do in a classroom and that your teacher wants you to do. And one really important thing that you can do is to work on really knowing in detail the meanings or uses of the most used verbs in English. Those are the auxiliary verbs, which I talked about in episodes 52 through 59. So that means including 59, 52, 53, and so on, and then 58 and 59. So those are verbs like can, should, will, would, do, be, and have. Another benefit of working on those words, for example, by listening to those episodes, is that they are the key to correctly constructing different sentence types, especially questions. Now, another verb that really helps you to sound more natural if you can learn it well is get, which has around 13 meanings, and that I talked about way back in episode 6. Understand and use get. Now, I don't want to just ask you to listen to my older episodes, even if they are really useful. I want to give you some fresh material. So, let's talk briefly about a category of words called discourse markers. Two of the most common discourse markers are well and like. These are words that we use when we don't know yet exactly what we want to say, but we want to continue talking. We also use them to show that we have understood what the other person is talking about, which makes the other person feel more comfortable in the conversation. Actually, a lot of my listeners are Russian speakers, and the equivalent term in Russian for discourse markers is parasites. Now, parasite actually is a really unpleasant and judgmental sounding word. It makes it sound like these words are taking the blood and life out of what you want to say. But again, that's a really judgmental way of looking at these words, which are a natural part of the way people speak, and even a necessary one. So let's focus for a minute on the discourse marker well. We use well as a discourse marker in a couple of different ways. First, we use it to show that we agree with another person, often, but not always, after disagreeing with them. So first, You might have disagreed with a person, and now you want to show that you agree with a person. Or it could just be that you're just showing that you agree with them in the first place without disagreeing beforehand. But usually there was a disagreement first. So 3 examples. 1. Well, okay, we can start class an hour later. 2. Well, I guess you're right. 3rd and last. Well, yes, that sounds more or less correct. Now, we can also use well to show another person that we are uncertain about something or are still formulating our thoughts. 3 examples. Pay attention especially to the tone of my voice while I speak. 1. Well, I don't know. 2. Well, let's think about it. 3rd and last. Well, I'm really not sure. So, another way, the last way that we can use well as a discourse marker, is to politely change the subject of our conversation. Usually when we do this, it is definitely a bit forceful, but also still polite. You might use this when, for example, the person you're talking to has become or is becoming very angry about what they or you are talking about. In that case, you can say, well, I think it's about time for me to go. Or you could say, well, how are your kids doing? There is another discourse marker that has a lot of functions, and that word is like. There are enough meanings of this word that giving you lots of examples would take too much of your time, so let me give you 4 meanings just to give you an idea, each one with 1 example. So, first meaning, used to say that a number or time is not exact. So, how much do you want to spend? I don't know, like 20 euros? Second meaning, used by a speaker when they need time to think about what they're saying. So, can I help you move your house tomorrow? Maybe if you pay me. Third meaning, used to express uncertainty. Well, I don't know. Fourth meaning, used to say that the speaker is uncertain about or surprised by what they're saying. Example, that's like the biggest pizza I've ever seen. So, if you want to learn more about like in depth and detail, you can listen to episode 8, The Many Uses of Like. Okay, I've now covered several things you can do to fake mastery of English. There's actually a lot more to say about this topic because even faking mastery is going to take time and effort. There are 2 more strategies I don't have time to talk about now, but which I will discuss in future episodes. The first strategy is studying the top 100 words of English and their most important meanings. I have for a limited time left a PDF on my website which will show you the meanings of these words you need to speak fluently, and you can find a link to that PDF in the description of this episode in Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to it. So, the first strategy is, pay attention to those 100 words. And actually, I have kind of an interesting story about this, these top 100 words. Some years ago, I had a student who was preparing for IELTS, and she was, I asked her to take some sample tests to get an idea of what kind of scores she could expect. And she took the reading test, and I told her before she took it, I said, look, don't use a timer. Don't hold to the 1 hour limit. What you need to do is take as much time as you want to. Don't use a dictionary, but take as much time as you want to. And she got a really solid score. I don't remember the exact score, but it was about an 8 in the reading section. But it took her about 2.5 hours to do it. So she was really good at guessing words from context and putting the meanings of words together, just from the general situation. And I told her, look, you need to really focus. I had an intuition. I told her, you need to focus on the top 100 words. And she did that. At first she kind of hesitated. She was like, I really don't want to do that. I said, I really think this is going to help you. So she did. She focused on them. And what happened was really impressive. So she went back and she took, another IELTS reading test, and she got a similar score, but instead of it taking her 2.5 hours, after really intensively studying these top 100 words, it took her a little bit more than an hour. So still over the time limit, but she got a similar score of 8, which is a really awesome score to get on IELTS, any part of it. But she only needed, a little bit more than an hour. I don't want to say that that's typical, that, you're going to get a much higher score on IELTS, or that your English is going to get much better if you study those top 100 words. But in her case, that did really have a huge impact. And it might, of course, be the case that you already know these top 100 words really well, but I think it's worth checking. If you already know them, you can check through the words, look at the different meanings, and it'll probably take you 20 minutes. So it would be a good use of your time, even if you already know them. And the second strategy is to focus on the most used verb tenses. In conversational English, the simple verb tenses, that means past simple, present simple, and future simple, are used in about 90% of sentences, with maybe only 7 or 8% in continuous tenses, and just a few percent in perfect tenses. So, think about that. 90% of the sentences use the simple tenses. That means you need to focus on them. So that means you need to really know your simple tenses well, including the past simple forms of irregular verbs. And that, again, is a topic that I will come back to in future episodes. That is all for this week, everyone. Thanks for listening, and we will talk again next Monday.